They do, but nationalism allowed for many nations to form, developments to accelerate, and brought stability to the world. None just allows for a fully anarchic society, or a dictatorship hated by all. Besides, the genocides are almost impossible to avoid, and even after they go through, and ethnic tensions drop drastically, they don't disappear. After overt alien invasion, we will somewhat pull together. Nariti and Grando stared on, as Axel wove and dodged through the trials of industrial-era wars and societies. Many nations formed, fell, were overthrown, and beaten down. Wars began, the world was consumed in flames, and tentative peace came and went. The timer sat in the bottom right, designating an established date system the humans had ended up using predominantly. December 24, 1967. Nariti sat up. The dates had previously been flipping by rapidly, too fast to read. Now, Axel had stopped. Following the movements of his key and mouse strokes, he saw him pull up the image of a weapon being detonated, a nuclear weapon. "What now, Axel?" Grando asked. Both of them expectantly looked at him, and then at the screen. "Well," he said as he got up, "I'm gonna need something a little more potent than this." He drained his cup and walked out of the room. He returned, this time carrying a glass bottle of what Nariti and Grando had assumed was cleaning supplies for the first week or two they had Axel under the same roof. It wasn't cleaning fluid, they found out later. This, as we all know, is the point it begins to fall apart. If it hasn't already, that is. He sat down and took a swig of the stuff in his hand. He resumed the game. Nuclear-era games have been interesting. Some have had complete annihilation with only bomber technology. Others had a Cold War's fall quiet, dismantle, and suddenly new nations with nuclear potential pop up. And the world returns to the brink of destruction. The general consensus is that you need to balance proxy conflicts, international diplomacy, and anything else that may arise, keep within the two extremes. Reckless development can destroy nations, and will. But that's just one among many ways this can go downhill. Nariti glanced at Grando, wondering if any of this was making sense to him, and caught him looking back at him, the same light in his eye. Dumbstruck. They both looked at the screen again, this time focused on the counter claiming the top center. Nuclear bombs, and then a percentage dictating the count of those that were missile delivery systems. Nariti was reminded of just how ruthless humans were. Eventually, the number flatlined, and then decreased, slowly, before flatlining again. Well, that's over. Let's see what secret projects we developed. Secret projects? Grando asked. I thought the nuclear programs had peaked for this era, or was I wrong? It certainly peaked, but there is a potential to push it much farther. That wasn't what I was talking about. He opened a list, and a dozen objects were described with a country listed next to the program. Axel turned to face them, a smile on his face. This isn't well known, trust me. A couple of small public forums on the galactic web, but many more, if you know where to look. You're kidding me, growled Grando. There were more powerful weapons that humanity developed in their nuclear era. Conceptual development. Only 2 or 3 of these programs saw anything more than the research part of R&D. Any other questions? No. All right. He turned back to the screen. Among these programs, there is the orbital strike satellites, asteroid diversion, and experimental laser-based weapons. Some we can make use of immediately, relatively speaking, others are nearly irrelevant or useless in the current state. For instance, the Kinetic strike satellites can be remade into smaller satellites or refitted to carry many smaller rounds. adjusted targeting computers, and now starships will have to search and destroy military satellites that are shielded, utilizing stealth to some degree, and well away from the mid-orbital height most begin strikes from. And they are being fired upon the entire time by low-powered weapons that are extremely hard to locate unless it's super high resolution. Axel took another couple of swigs from the bottle. "Are you saying this is how humanity fended off the swarm?" asked Nariti. He had always thought he had to enter another age first before humanity could have more than a remote possibility. "No. This is how we flailed wildly until we could replicate their technology." He held up his hands a distance apart and said, 2-foot rods decelerated enough to peel away from the mother satellite off in mist. "We fired hundreds, if not thousands, to cover large chunks of space to fend off the invaders. Several thousand missed. If they didn't hit something else in orbit, burn up in the atmosphere, or drop into the sea, they could cause significant damage." London, Rome, Frankfurt, and a handful of other European nations had rounds cleave through entire buildings. "We didn't really have a choice in the matter, and were quite surprised when 6 months in, they still hadn't removed more than a handful of the 700 or so existing satellites. The grimmest estimates gave us 2 months before we were defenseless. That never happened, as we found out. At the rate they were discovering, compared to our hurried production, we could produce 1.5 satellites for every one destroyed. Ammunition could be rebuilt at 20 a day. A staggering volume, tempered by fallout and impacts, failure and distant intercepts. War, as it moves from simply throwing a stick at your opponent to using orbital systems, grows more and more complex. Fault-prone too. So what now? You mass-produce these weapons and call it there. Impossible right now. Delta V has peaked for engine outputs, so we are trapped until AD. Nariti understood that as asteroid diversion. We can deflect the huge rocks, they will begin to deorbit in a few decades. Scouts will have reached the system and can be ignored unless you want to bring the full fleet down on your population. Isolated assaults will be ignored, but it is a delicate matter nonetheless. In roughly 30 years, we should progress to a point where these projects can be acted upon, likely triggering new conflicts, but that's the price to be paid. Nariti was speechless. What about the terrestrial conflicts and plots? Certainly those can pitch you over the edge. He took a sip from his bottle. Yep, they can. Nationalism usually brings that threat of supremacy, and it's softly coded in that the conflicts are unavoidable. Culture wars, infighting, globalism, they have the potential to strip the world of the tools necessary to survive. It makes attempting to proceed from that point forward almost impossible. Usually though, they take care of themselves. Counter-movements, watchdogs, and whistleblowers keep the virtual suicide in check. Good thing to mention though, as occasionally it begins to sift out of control. He trailed off as he opened up a screen with lists of organizations that he began to sort by the attributes: terror, globalist, and supremacy. Dozens slotted into each, with overlap highlighted by a color-coded key. Could be worse than this game. 80 groups with hostile intent towards each other, and the opposition is nominal. Now, the opposition is also important. The attributes liberty, nationalism, moderate, and equality were listed. A smaller list opened. "Are you sure you have enough of those groups?" Grando voiced. Author's account and link to original text is in the description.